This is 9/11 Freefall.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to another episode of 9/11 Freefall. I'm your host, Andy Steele, and tonight, John O'Malley is back. He's going to be talking about his outreach at CPAC this year, trying to talk about Building 7 to all the people that attended that conference, trying to reach out to the influential people that care about politics in this country. And we're going to be talking about politics in general tonight. You know, when you wake up to the 9/11 controlled demolition evidence, you wonder, how can they keep an issue like this contained? How can they keep the message controlled on what people see and what people believe when the evidence is so obvious? Well, when you look at the actual political system and how the machine is manipulated to shove certain candidates down our throats and exclude others, then it becomes more understandable. So we're going to be mixing all of that in tonight and relating those two issues. So before I play tonight's interview with John O'Malley, I'm going to play a clip for you. This is from the movie Spin. Spin is a movie about a person who was able to get satellite feeds of interviews of the people before and after interviews, candidates for president, other people, newscasters. But this is related to the discussion that me and John have tonight when they talk about the campaign of Larry Agron, who ran for the Democratic nomination in 1992. So after our moment of silence, I'm going to play a clip from that movie Spin for you, and then my interview with John O'Malley. So we're going to take our moment of silence to remember the victims of 9/11 and their families, and all the people who died in the wars that followed 9/11, beginning now. And that is 10 seconds.
Before Clinton was shooed into office, he had to compete against a host of other Democratic candidates. The media focused on 4 of these candidates, but Larry Agron was a 5th candidate the press did not report on.
There's no makeup here?
During the 1992 U.S. Conference of Mayors, the New York Times reported that, quote, dozens of mayors seem to agree on one thing: the single candidate who truly understands urban needs is Larry Agron, unquote.
They promised to bring this stuff over.
None of the networks mentioned Agron's presence at the convention.
How about if I run over that Super Saver?
One of Agron's staff had to run over to the Super Saver and buy some makeup because the network had broken its promise to provide it. This was typical of the media's treatment of Agron. When he appeared at this Democratic candidates forum, this Associated Press photo simply cropped Agron out of the frame. During the New Hampshire primary, the TV news reported the polling numbers of the top 5 Democratic candidates: Brown, Clinton, Harkin, Kerry, and Tsongas. When Agron moved into a 3-way tie with Harkin and Brown with 2% of the vote, most of the TV news didn't mention Agron. The day Bill Clinton captured what may have been the most valuable airtime of the entire election, as he spoke to 50 million viewers about his alleged affair, was the same day that a poll showed Agron's support at 4%. He had passed Brown and was the 5th leading candidate. When ABC's Sunday Evening News reported this poll, they simply deleted Agron entirely by not reporting his candidacy. During the New Hampshire primary, Agron's only live commercial TV appearance was through this satellite feed to ABC's Nightline. But the Nightline program wasn't directly about the election. When Agron complained to news executives about his lack of coverage, he was told he had not earned the right to media exposure because he had not received enough media exposure.
And on stage, the 5 major contenders for the Democratic presidential nomination.
Although Agron was on the ballot in nearly half the country, he was barred from most televised debates, including this one sponsored by the League of Women Voters. He couldn't meet one of the League's main criteria, which was, quote, recognition by the national media as a candidate meriting media attention, unquote.
Good evening and welcome to the Democratic presidential candidates debate on urban America.
Agron wanted to debate on urban America, calling for a 50% cut in defense spending and the reinvestment of some of that money into America's decaying cities.
We are going to be coming to you, live from Lehman College, and you'll hear a bit of a disturbance in the background, but we'll go on with that in any case.
The disturbance is Larry Agron, asking to be included in the debate so that he can explain his plans for defense cuts and urban revitalization.
Transfer of President Ferdinand Ferrer, and Mr. President, I suggest you wait for just a moment till the man is quieted or chooses to quiet down. All right. Mr.
Agron was quickly arrested. His court date fell on the first day of the Democratic National Convention.
During this campaign, but very little said about the problems facing America's cities. Tonight, we'll change all that.
Without media exposure and the debates, Agron couldn't quickly receive federal campaign funds, and his candidacy lost momentum.
You look all right on camera.
What's that?
You look all right. There's no hot spots.
Really? Okay. I usually got a mustache that shows through here.
Okay,
why don't you go get some stuff, Mike?
I am going to go get some needles.
Oh, yeah. There we go. Campaign funds.
The Democratic Party refused to include Agron in the debates or speak to the networks on his behalf. Agron talked about his exclusion, saying, "I've challenged my own party for its continuing complicity in Cold War thinking, Cold War rhetoric, and Cold War budgets."
John O'Malley is a retired federal employee. His background is in statistical analysis, aerospace, aerodynamics, system administration, database applications, applied mathematics, computer modeling, project management, cost accounting, and farming. He spent the majority of his federal career in the Department of Defense, including Special Operations and the Office of the Secretary of Defense. Now he's a volunteer for architects and engineers for 911Truth on its Congressional Outreach team and other teams. John, welcome back to 911 Freefall.
Thank you.
Now, I love having you on, and there's a lot of people who listen to the show who enjoy it when you come on the program, so I'm very happy that you could do it this weekend. For those who are tuning in to you for the first time, because we've got a lot to talk about today, but briefly remind our audience about yourself, anything that I left out in that intro, and why you agree that the buildings in New York were brought down in a controlled demolition on 9/11.
Well, I worked in the Pentagon, in that part of the Pentagon that was hit by the aircraft on 9/11. I was not there that day. If I had been, I might not be here today. And even though some of the things I saw at the Pentagon did not look right, I never really paid attention to it. And it was years later when I started to hear more about the 9/11 truth issues. I looked at Building 7, and Building 7 is a slam dunk. It is a steel skyscraper that is composed of steel beams, and each steel beam is physically attached, either bolted or welded, to another steel beam. And because it came down at in 7 seconds at a rate of acceleration due to gravity, that is the smoking gun that proves that we were lied to about what happened on 9/11. And then the question is, well, if they would lie to us about that, what else have they lied to us about? And then once you start doing that, you find that we're being lied to by an awful lot of things.
And that's why this issue is so important. It's not something you can just let go of and say, well, that happened, 13 years ago now, and I'm not going to think about this anymore. It's terrible, but I'm going to move on, because if they're lying about something this big, what else are they lying to you about? What are they lying to you about now? What are they going to lie about the next time? This is a step too far for most of America, the part of it, the people in it who are aware of this evidence, and that's why we have a 9/11 Truth movement. That's why we have so many great people like yourselves coming forward and doing whatever they can. And you've done a lot. You've reached out to people in the political arena. You've even stepped into the political arena yourself. I forgot to mention you've been a candidate for office too. So I mean, you know, you're out there on the front lines in an area where I think we still need to have a tremendous amount of representation. You know, a lot of people become cynical and they see the way that our representatives react when they're confronted with the evidence. They immediately, you know, just dismiss it as conspiracy theory, don't want to think about it. It's very phony the way they dismiss it. And not every single one of them, but a large number of them. And people become cynical and they say, you're never going to get Congress to acknowledge this. You're never going to get anybody in Washington to do anything about this because everything is controlled. Everybody is bought and paid for. What can you do? But you are out there still doing what you can. Why do you think we need to care about politics in this fight for 9/11 truth when so many people in Congress have proven that they're afraid of this issue? I want to get your take on that.
Well, like it or not, our life is controlled by people who are elected to office. And even though we may not like politics, I know I personally do not like it. If you live in what purports to be a democracy, there is a penalty for non-involvement. And if we believe that our representatives are not representing us, we either have to hold them accountable by voting for someone else, or we have to get involved in the political process by either running for office, which is actually, I found out, it's very easy. It's surprisingly easy. Or we have to support candidates that are going to try to prevent the country from descending into tyranny, because that's what I see happening. I think our situation is very serious.
I agree. I mean, obviously, that's the reason I'm doing this show and why we have an alternative news movement in this country. Everything's getting worse, and I'm not trying to sound like a downer. I'm not trying to sound like a pessimist here. I'm just stating the situation for what it is. And so what are we going to do? I want to be able to tell the next generation that I did everything I could, that I brought this information to as many people as I could. And you never know. I mean, the winds of change could come through tomorrow, and we could see an entirely new development, an entirely new situation. So that's why we got to keep on fighting. But we can't abdicate our responsibility as citizens. You know, we're taught from being little kids that we need to participate in our country, that we need to participate in our government, right? But when you actually try to do it for something that is real, well, we see the reaction. We've seen the reaction now for the past however many years that the 9/11 Truth movement has existed. You know, we grill it into kids' heads that they need to have a killer instinct and for things like sports and all of these activities that really mean nothing in the end. But when it actually comes to saving your country, the general attitude conveyed is to be quiet and stay silent and just care about the issues that have been designated to you to care about. You know, things like save the environment or raise money for cancer. And I'm not trashing these issues. I mean, they're important issues, but issues that challenge the status quo of how people think, how people stand in relation to their government, are discouraged. We've seen this. I've seen this. It's frowned upon to even ask questions about this. It's getting less frowned upon. I mean, I think we've gone a long way since when I first woke up. When at the time, like 2006, when if I just asked a question about Building 7, people would say, "Well, you're scaring me. You sound like one of those people." Now everybody's heard of this. Everyone practically that I talk to has heard of this and generally agrees with this issue, whether they want to think about it or not. What do you think about the change in people's perception of this issue? I mean, you came around to it long after I did, so maybe you are that change. But what's your take on that?
Well, what I've noticed is that each person comes to it differently. Now, in my case, Donald Trump was actually the guy when he got Obama to put the birth certificate on whitehouse.gov. At that time, I was listening to, there's this guy, Piers Corbyn in the UK, who has a very good track record of weather predictions, and I had a Google alert for him because for me, weather is, when you have a farming operation, weather is a big deal. And this turned up, he was being interviewed by this guy named Alex Jones that I had never heard of before. And at the end of the interview, this was right after Donald Trump, this was 2011, when they just put that PDF for the birth certificate on whitehouse.gov. And Alex Jones said that he just looked at it, and not only was it a forgery, it was not a very good forgery. And I said, oh, come on, that's impossible. That could never happen in this country. But out of curiosity, I went to whitehouse.gov, and I downloaded it, and I looked at it, and I said, oh, my God. You can see the evidence of copying and pasting. And I used to teach Adobe classes where I worked, and there's this lady I know. She and I both taught Adobe classes, and I was out to work with people that I worked with, and I talked to her, and she said, John, I thought you were going off the deep end. But then when I saw it, I said, oh, my God. And that's what really woke me up to the controlled press and the fact that there must be an organization here. Because in order to control the large number of news outlets, you would have to have an organization. And this organization is obviously a secret organization. So after that, I started looking at other things like, you know, I remembered the things that I saw at the Pentagon that didn't look right, and I, analyzed Building 7. I tried, every which way and 7 different ways on Sunday to figure out, was there any way possible that the official story could be true? And, I'm not a structural engineer, but I spent my life in, science and engineering. And as much as I did not want to believe what I was seeing, the evidence is there. The evidence does not go away. It's like the evidence keeps looking at you. And I have gone down the rabbit hole like a lot of other people. And then after that, I started to become politically active after I, joined Architects and Engineers. They asked me what I could do for them, and I said, well, I live in the D.C. area, so I can actually be down in Capitol Hill within 45 minutes. So then I started going to political meetings. So I did that, and then I learned something from that. And I think the situation in our country is more dangerous than possibly it has ever been, because we have an enemy within. And there's a famous quote from Cicero, who was a Roman politician, about the enemy from within, that the enemy from within is much more dangerous than an enemy that you can see. And that's what we have. And now we're going down the road of the government recording all of your emails and your clicks and your phone conversations and monitoring you. This is very, very dangerous. So, tyranny is on the march in America, and some people are waking up. And the thing that I think that that they didn't think about during the operational planning stage of 9/11 is the Internet. The Internet has really given them a lot of problems. And I think the big danger is they are going to try to control the Internet and censor it in a way so that, people like you and Alex Jones will disappear. And they're doing it right now. There's these regulations on supposedly with net neutrality, but they will not release these regulations. So they're obviously trying to hide something. But that could be the next big battle, because if they control the Internet in this country like they do it in China, I think that's very, very dangerous.
Well, we owe a lot of our awakening to the Internet. I mean, folks, if something ever did happen to the Internet, I'm not disappearing now. Something might happen to this show, but I'm still going to be around. And it's like what John has described in previous interviews as a one-way mirror. You don't just simply go back to watching television and being content with the world as it is. And I consider myself very fortunate because our guest here had never seen the movie Spin, and I don't know if I'll have time to describe it in the introduction of this show. But briefly, it's a movie that came out. I don't really know the time it came out, probably the late 90s, but most of it takes place in 1992, where the filmmaker caught satellite broadcasts of various news footage from CNN, NBC, ABC, all of those places during the 1992 presidential election, and then during other events when the shows would go to commercial, the candidates and whoever's on the camera would continue talking with other people and get makeup put on them, and he caught all these images and would catch their conversations. And so you got to see these people as they really are, and you got to see how phony the system really is and how scripted and manipulated the message is that they put out to us. And I think a lot of us understand it intellectually, but it really drives it home when you actually see it in this movie. So I'm going to make this movie available on the website, 911freefall.com, for our audience to listen to. And the reason I think this is important, and the reason we're talking about politics on a 9/11-focused show, is because obviously the situation is we have proven the case that the buildings in New York were brought down in controlled demolitions. How are they able to keep this message contained? And I think that the politics aspect is largely built on the media aspect of this. I think that the media, this is my personal opinion, is the biggest problem. I think once the media falls down, once we do something about the controlled media, the politics will have no choice but to fix itself. Otherwise, the people are going to be very upset. John, you saw that movie for the first time today, Spin. What was your impression of that film, and how do you think that relates to our message here about the science of the building destructions in New York on 9/11?
Well, I think it's just another, data, although it's anecdotal data, to support that we do not have a free press. We have a controlled press, and there has to be an organization here. And this organization is obviously a secret organization. But, the guy that they consistently kept out of the Democratic primary?
Larry Agron.
Okay. You have to have an organization to do that. One guy could not do that. So whoever these people are who control this organization, they control public opinion. And by controlling public opinion now, you can control elections. And you can control the government. That may be one of the ways that they keep members of Congress and the Senate in place. I've noticed that, there's one senator who will talk about 9/11, a former senator from Alaska, but of course he's no longer in office. But he'll talk about it. So there obviously is a control system where they control people. And you can see that from outside, but what you cannot see, at least I cannot see, is what goes on inside.
I saw this during the Republican primaries in 2008 with Ron Paul. Regardless of what your political ideology is, you have to look at both sides of this. Larry Agron on the left, Ron Paul on the right, and see that we have a problem here. Of course, Ron Paul was against all of the warring and spending on wars, too. If 9/11 Truth were a candidate running for office, it'd be getting the same treatment. Okay, the media does the same thing with our issue. So the problems that these candidates run into when they're trying to seek office, and they're they're just as viable and worthy of the coverage as the other candidates are in a world where everything is equal. The same problems that they're running into are the problems that we are running into, because like I said, it's not a case of us having to prove that the buildings were brought down in controlled demolitions. The case has been proven. It's just getting the media to acknowledge it and getting the public to understand that this is a very real and important issue that we need to face. With these congressmen, because we've seen them, one after another, claiming ignorance about this, do you think that claiming ignorance on this issue is acceptable given the magnitude of it? And I mean, that kind of sounds kind of like a question I'm building up, and the answer is going to be obvious. So just to add on to that, what about people in Congress who weren't in power during 9/11 or when the NIST reports were released, too? Are they more or less complicit in allowing this cover-up to take place?
Well, I would look at it. There would be two cases. The first case is that they are truly ignorant, like I was, a few years ago. But then the second case would be that they actually know the truth, but they just won't talk about it. Now, in that case, they are a part of the cover-up operation. Now, when you are a part of a cover-up to a crime, you become an accessory to that crime. And you can go to jail and even be executed for that. So I view these people as being criminals, accessories to the crime of murder, of premeditated murder of 3,000 Americans. In the case of the Pentagon, that is under the legal definition of treason, because that is an attack on a U.S. military installation. So this has kind of affected me because, when I was a candidate, I got these calls to be interviewed by the Washington Post, and I was kind of leery about that because I'm saying, boy, I'm supposed to talk to these people who work for a criminal organization, because I now view the Washington Post and the New York Times and all these people as criminal organizations because they are accessories to historic crimes of a historic nature. So, yeah, I think if you can make a case that the people on the Warren Commission should have been convicted of being accessories to murder because they were. In fact, there's even a book out about the Warren Commission. I think it's called Accessories After the Fact or something like that. So, yeah, I think these people are traitors. That's being kind to them because not only was 9/11. I don't want to minimize the 3,000 murders, but it is being used as a justification to put our country on the path to becoming a totalitarian police state. And that did not work out very well when it was tried in Nazi Germany. And it didn't work out very well in Russia when it was tried under Stalin. And it's not going to work out very well in this country. So this has to be stopped.
You just went to CPAC. Tell us about your experience. Why did you go down there again this year? And what did you see? Who did you talk to?
Well, I guess this is my maybe third or fourth year going down there. And the reason that I went down there is, after I woke up, for me it's local. I don't have to, fly a plane or get a hotel room. I just drive over there. And the way I look at it, half of the country does not even vote. The other half that does vote, 98% of them, all they do is vote. The people who really have an enormous impact on the country is that tiny percentage of people who are politically active. That's like, 1%. That's like the tiny number of people who vote. And so I figured CPAC would be a good place to meet those people because CPAC, which is the Conservative Political Action Committee Conference, is where, the politically active people from the Republican side would be. So what I've done, is I, put on a suit, so I look fairly professional. And now, if you've ever, when you go to these political events, what you have is there's usually one room where all these people make speeches, and it's like one candidate after another, or one pundit after another. And then there's another room where you have tables, and at each table you have these groups. Some of these groups you've never heard of, but there's like at the typical Republican thing, there would be right to life, Second Amendment, the Libertarian group, and a very large number of these groups, many of whom are fairly obscure. And what I would do is I would just go from table to table, and I would just initiate conversations with these people and try to establish rapport. And then I would kind of turn the conversation over to 9/11, Building 7, and I would, ask them for their business card, and I'd, talk with them a little bit, and then I'd go to the next table and do the same thing. I would do that all day long, because my reason is that these people are that tiny percentage of the population that are politically active. And then when I go home that night, I would have a handful of business cards with their emails. And then I would send each one an email saying it was nice to talk to you, and by the way, here's a video you might be interested in. I would send them experts speak out, or loose change, or whatever, hoping that I'm trying to wake up these people like I was woken up. And then the other thing I discovered is that if you appear reasonably professional, people will just walk up to you and ask you if they can interview you. So like the first time I went, I was being interviewed on a radio show. It was Tea Party radio show out of New Jersey. And then last year, this young lady from the Washington Post walked up to me and asked me if she could interview me. So she had a camera there with a cameraman all set up. So I said, well, sure, why not? So she asked me questions about the Republican Party, and I just talked to her about 9/11, Building 7, and just watched her jaw kind of drop. And then this year, when I walked through this is sort of like a central lobby area, and this lady walked up to me and said that she was from CNN. Could she interview me? And I said, fine. So I talked to her about 9/11 and Building 7, and then she kept asking me about George Bush. I meant to say Jeb Bush. And, well, what do you think of Jeb Bush? And, Jeb Bush this and Jeb Bush that. So to me, that indicated that she had probably been sent out by her editor to find out what people were thinking about Jeb Bush, that they are obviously trying to push Jeb Bush, that the powers that be want Jeb Bush to be the next president. And that was very obvious to me. And another thing, when I was down there walking around, and there's a lot of people because it's a fairly large affair. And one thing about these political gatherings is it's kind of a big party. So you can walk up to a stranger and strike up a conversation and talk to them about whatever. And if you were to do that out on the street, people would think you were weird. But in a social affair where kind of everybody kind of feels that they have a certain amount of commonality with everyone, you can do that. Now, the one thing I noticed down there is you have some people who appear to have political power or grassroots within the conservative movement because they have volunteers. These are unpaid volunteers who are wearing their T-shirts, going around with signs. So that indicates they have some supporters. And the four people that I saw that seemed to have that were Rand Paul, he was the biggest. Rick Santorum, who was kind of surprising, but he's got a hold on the Right to Life group. And then you had Ben Carson. Well, he's local, plus obviously somebody's spending a lot of money on Ben Carson. And then you have Scott Walker, because he has sort of anti-Washington credentials, because I don't think he's ever lived in Washington. I saw no volunteers for Jeb Bush, none at all. And of all the candidates, and there's a large number, Jeb Bush was the only one who was booed. He was the only one where I was told a few dozen people walked out. And in spite of this, on the news, there's all these stories telling about what a great thing Jeb Bush did at CPAC, and they report his CPAC experience as being a success, in spite of the fact that he was the only one who was booed, and he was the only one where people walked out on him. And he had no evidence that I saw of, volunteers who were working. So, this guy, he has all of the signs of someone who is being promoted, just like Obama was promoted. They were doing the same thing for him. So, I wouldn't say the fix is in for Jeb, but I'd say some very powerful people who control these huge network media corporations are doing everything possible to push Jeb Bush, that he's getting the kind of publicity that would cost millions and millions if he were to buy it. And what I also saw is there are some people in the Republican Party who have a very strong suspicion of Jeb Bush. And this is like I don't know if you're familiar with John Hinckley in Dark Legacy, the purported associations with the JFK murder and the JFK Jr. murder. Now, whether any of that is true, I don't know. But there's some of that. There's this atmosphere of distrust of the Bush family that goes back, generations. And then there's some people who just think it's un-American for any family to have that many people in the office of the presidency. So, time will tell.
And I can hear the critics now of this show saying this is an excuse to bash Bush, just like they used to label 911Truth as an excuse to bash Bush. And folks, John right here is just reporting what he sees on the ground, just like a real reporter would do at CPAC. Unfortunately, we don't really have real reporters, as John's stories have demonstrated. Right here you have a case where John is talking about one particular thing. The reason that he's down there is to talk to people about Building 7. All of these supposedly affluent and prestigious people within the Republican Party, and the woman just keeps on asking him about Jeb Bush. I experienced this on a smaller scale. I wasn't at CPAC. I was just at a town hall meeting, and they asked why I was there, and I said I wanted to ask the candidate who was speaking about Building 7, and they just wanted a soundbite to have me on there saying, I think town halls are good. It's a chance to practice our freedom of speech and our democracy. Some stupid, hokey nonsense that they could feel good about. Because they count on people having stars in their eyes. They count on somebody down there just drifting around, and a CNN reporter grabs them and says, I'm from CNN. And they count on that person being so starstruck and excited that they're going to be on the news that night that they're just going to go along with whatever the reporter wants to go along with. So they'll forget the reason that they're there and just be like, I think Jeb Bush is good, and then they can spin that however they want. Right? But right here, we're doing the reporting that a lot of the news isn't, and so I don't know what's going to happen. I don't like to speak in absolutes because I don't have the full picture revealed to me. There's still some puzzle pieces missing off the table. So, maybe we won't have Jeb Bush be the next president. However, if he is, I want the audience to go back in the archives to this moment when they're listening to John O'Malley talk about these things. The strange lack of volunteers, at least according to what John saw, and the fact that people were booing Bush. John, who won the straw poll at CPAC?
Rand Paul.
Oh my God, Rand Paul. So again, this is not a political show, so I'm not trying to endorse any particular candidate, but I want our audience to see how the media manipulates what should be the most important aspect of our political process, or at least up there with one of the most important aspects, which is selecting our president, and to see how this process is really just tightly controlled and how the message is crafted. And when you realize that, understanding how they can keep an obvious building demolition, which resulted in countless thousands of lives lost on 9/11, and then countless lives lost in the years that followed from all of the wars, how they can keep that truth contained and keep the story of that day controlled. John, just from your gut instincts and your perceptions there at CPAC, but not just from the Republican side, the Democrat side too, do you feel that our next candidates have already been picked for us?
Oh, yeah. I think this organization tries to own every horse in the race. So no matter which horse wins, they control it. And that's why that guy, Larry Agron, or did I pronounce his name right?
Yeah, Larry Agron, yeah.
Apparently, they did not own him, so that's why he had no chance. So they want to own both candidates in both parties and all the candidates. And one thing about Jeb Bush, even though he's obviously a favorite of the controllers, in the straw poll, the two guys who won, I think first and second, I think it was Rand Paul, and I think it was Scott Walker, and they were in the 20s. And then the next two, I think one of whom was Cruz, was in the single digits. And then Jeb, he was in, I meant to say double digits, like in the teens. And then Jeb, he was in the single digit. So, he was in a distant fifth place, which makes it even more hilarious when, CNN reports how wonderful Jeb did at CPAC. This guy, one thing I noticed down there at CPAC, a large percentage, a surprisingly large percentage, were young people, a lot of college students. And I think a lot of these people are from a very libertarian viewpoint, and they see that their future is being destroyed right before their eyes. And what I noticed when I talked to, I don't know how many people I talked to, but it was a lot. And this is not a scientific report, a study, it's just my anecdotal reporting. Most of the young people that I talked to they knew about Building 7, they had seen loose change and all that. It was the older people that I talked to for whom Building 7 was new to. So now one thing about campaigns is the younger people have a big impact because they volunteer. They provide a lot of the legwork. So in order for them to get Jeb Bush elected, they are going to have to spend an enormous amount of money, and they're going to have to use their control over the media in ways that are probably going to be very blatant. So, but then, now there's the other thing that, in terms of elections, now I live in Maryland, where the voting has been rigged for years and years and years, and it's rigged through the use of the voting machines. And I'm actually a part of a group that's involved in trying to, make Maryland elections more honest. But what they did in this state, and I think in other states, is if you want to rig elections, and this is something I never had a clue about until I actually ran for office. The first thing they do is they get rid of the paper ballot. The reason that the people who want to rig elections hate the paper ballot is because the paper ballot provides a physical audit trail, and it provides the ability to do an actual recount if you have a close election. Well, after what I've seen in this state, I don't know if I can believe any elections anymore unless there's a real, honest paper ballot that you can use to do a real audit. So now that's another way that they can, get their favorite boy in office. And, some of that has happened in every election, and both parties do it. The corruption that I've seen, it's in both parties. The depth of corruption in our political system and in our are the controlled press. It's something I had no clue about until I actually started to look at this stuff. And, Building 7 was the kind of the door to the rabbit hole. Because no matter what they do, they cannot explain that. They cannot explain Building 7, and they cannot explain how it was censored out of the news. When you go to Building 7, the edifice falls.
It falls in 7 seconds for 105 feet of free fall. John here is not exaggerating. I've brought up before in HBO, In Memoriam, the documentary where there was explosions took place, where the firefighters react to explosions, but they cut it off right before the explosions happen. And this is before there was even a 9/11 Truth movement. So there was a concerted effort to keep aspects of 9/11 that challenged the official story from the public's attention. And when you understand that, you begin to understand... you begin to question, why is this being kept secret? How is it being kept secret? And then you kind of branch out and start seeing these issues with within the political system and realize that this is institutionalized. This is just kind of the way things are done. And when you look at humanity and the history of governments throughout time and the nature of just people in general, it becomes more understandable. Because, of course, if you've got a lot of power concentrated in one place, what are you going to attract? You're going to attract the people that want that power. And why do they so desperately want that power? Because they want to use it. And so, a lot of times you're going to get the kinds of people that are going to do whatever they can to get that power. Sort of like a metaphorical, like science fiction movie where the strongest have to survive, where they're all chopping each other's heads off to get the prize in the end. Well, in this case, it's being done politically. We're trying to do something about it here at AE911Truth. But what you mentioned before about the young people already being aware of this, and the older people are the people who aren't aware of Building 7, really goes to the heart of why I stay in this fight and why I encourage people to speak out every day that they can, because even if we're not having an immediate acknowledgement of what happened that day, we are building a population that is going to inherit control of this country, that is aware of things like this, that will hopefully have it in their minds and try to prevent something like this from happening again, and therefore building a better America. It took the abolitionist movement decades to get any headway in this country, to get the proper amendments passed to free the slaves and have us truly live up to the promises of liberty that this country was founded upon, right? And people were ridiculed. People had to endure. People were killed. I went over it once on the show, comparing 9/11 Truth to the abolitionist movement. People had to suffer greatly for that, but look what happened in the end. So we just got to keep at it and be in for the long haul. But it's funny because you talk about these things and how obvious they're going to have to be in order to push Jeb Bush, for instance. And you can see how phony the media is just when you turn on the television set. Within 2 minutes, you can see through the agenda and what they're trying to push. You can see how our political system is manipulated. And so you wonder, how is it going on? How are people letting this go on? So my question to you is, as more people see this monster hiding behind the mask, how long do you think the public can keep on living in a charade and pretending the political system is actually what the gatekeepers pretend it is?
Well, I've actually thought about this, and I think the other side is thinking very deeply about this, and that's why they'll doing this current thing of trying to gain control or censorship over the Internet. That's why they will not make public the regulations that they just agreed to. This is not an issue that people go back and forth on. Once you go one way, it's like a one-way door. You won't go the other way. So that there is a constant movement where the forces of 9/11 Truth are continually getting more numerous, and the forces, the other side, is getting smaller in comparison. Now, how soon that's going to happen, I'm not sure, but you can have, what's called a discontinuity or a tipping point, where things reach a certain point, and then there's a sudden massive shift. And anything we can do to accelerate that, I think, would be good for the country. I think, if you look at the numbers for the big media outlets like, CNN and Fox and whatever, on a year-by-year basis, all their numbers are going down. And the number of people who are turned off by these organizations is increasing steadily. Like, one example is the Tea Party. If you are a reporter from whatever, CNN, ABC, CBS, whatever, and you go to a Tea Party gathering, and if you identify yourself as being a reporter from CBS or CNN, I mean, you are going to have a lot of verbal abuse, just because it's very unpleasant for these people. Because, a lot of the people who work in these organizations that are essentially criminal organizations are not themselves criminal. They're just people who do what they're told to do, and they get a job as a reporter, and they want to protect their salary and their benefits. Because, getting a job as a reporter is not easy, because there's a lot of applicants for these jobs, especially at any kind of a place like, say, the New York Times or the Washington Post or whatever. So, in terms of what's going to happen in the future, I don't know. But I mean, the one thing I would hope will happen, and this may be similar to the JFK thing, because I see so many parallels, so many multiple modus operandi in the murder of John Kennedy and 9/11. And with the Kennedy murder, it took years to have a congressional investigation, which actually turned out to be a phony investigation. And then it took more years, and the Oliver Stone movie, till you got the Assassination Review Records Act. I'm not sure if that's the exact title of it. So, I mean, the way the system is supposed to work is we elect members of the House and the Senate. And if we're not happy with them, then we either need to elect someone else or run ourselves. And I think a big part of our problem is we are not the majority yet. 9/11 Truth is still a minority within the country. And I talked to a lot of people who, they're fairly prominent, they're educated, they're intelligent, and when I start talking to them about this stuff, they look at me as if I'm a crazy nut from another planet. They believe in the official story of 9/11, in spite of all the evidence to the contrary, and some of these people are political junkies who, watch the news constantly, thinking that they're being informed, and they don't know that they are being disinformed. And let me tell you, when you come to that realization, it's like being punched in the stomach. So, I'm not sure what's going to happen, but the big deal, I think, is maintaining a free internet. I think that's the next battleground. If we can maintain or move back to a free press, everything will get better. I know there's a famous quote from George Washington, and it goes something like, if we ever lose freedom of the press, we will be led to the slaughter like sheep, or something like that. Well, that's kind of where we are right now, that a large percentage of the population believes what they're being told by the controlled press. And that's a big deal.
Well, I think a lot of it depends on our audience. You mentioned how you put on a suit, you went down to CPAC, and you talked to people. You went from table to table, and you talked to people. And I see this trend now being promoted in our society and embraced in our society of not talking to people, where more people will prefer to text rather than just actually pushing the send button on their phones and talking to someone. You see this with companies, customer service. I mean, good God, you have to jump through 9 million flaming hoops to get somebody on the phone. And I get made fun of because I actually try to talk to someone rather than send an email or send in a ticket. I try to just get it resolved on the phone by actually talking to a person. That's always my first de facto thing, is I'm going to call them. Some people make fun of me about that and say, oh, I can tell you're a small town guy. But I think that's the most effective ways of reaching people. People have a harder time avoiding you, first of all, when you're talking to them. And it's just easier, too, as if you do things directly. We're in a society that would rather buy something on Amazon than drive down to the store and purchase it. So, we got to do the legwork. And when we become just reliant on the internet to share information with each other, we're going to put an article or a video up on YouTube and wait for somebody to come around and find it. I mean, I'm not criticizing people who make videos. I mean, they're important, they're critical, but we also have to take this from the internet, take it to the streets, not to sound cliche, and knock on doors and bring this information to as many people as possible. I think that's what the system, whoever is behind this manipulation, this control, I feel that that's what they're afraid of. That they're happy as long as it's confined to this little glass box on your desk or in your phone, and do not want it out into the quote-unquote real world, into the place where it can touch them, where it can actually influence things. And so it's going to depend on this audience and on people who have that fire in them and that they want to do something about this issue and are willing to deal with the awkwardness of bringing this up even when it's not welcomed. John, in our last minute or two, do you have any final thoughts for the audience? Anything you want to leave people with?
I'm fairly optimistic, and I would say, just keep talking to your friends, relatives, coworkers, spread the word, and I think if we do that, we can get our country back.
Well said. Well, John O'Malley, thank you so much for coming on 9/11 Freefall. This program is on every Thursday night on No Lies Radio at 10 o'clock Eastern, 7 o'clock Pacific. You can also download MP3s of the show from the Internet Archive by going to 911freefall.com. This is Andy Steele saying have a great week and good luck.